Hey, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Greg Wong, and it's great to meet you all. Can you guys do me a quick favor and maybe give me a thumbs up or like wave in the video or something, or type some gibberish in the chat just to let me know you guys are here and can hear me and I'm coming through? All right, fantastic. Thanks, Allison. All right, well, it's really nice to see so many familiar names and some new ones as well. So we've only got an hour, so let's just dive in. Okay, so here's how things are going to work today. First, I'm going to give you guys a very brief intro, and then I'm going to throw it over to Kevin, and he's going to walk us through the presentation we put together. In terms of our agenda, we'll discuss three main things. The first thing is a brief overview of college admissions. And even though you might be familiar with some of this stuff, we think it's pretty important that we're all on the same page before we start talking about how COVID is impacting things, which will be the second main topic. And then lastly, we'll chat about some recommendations. What are some things that you guys might want to consider doing? In terms of questions, because we have so much to cover, we won't have any time taking live questions during the presentation. However, if you do have any questions, please do jot it down. And please email us afterwards, and we'll get back to you. In terms of some other housekeeping items, you'll notice that everyone is muted. We're going to keep it that way for now to avoid any incidental background noises, which does tend to occur during these Zoom meetings with large groups of people. We'll also be recording this. Feel free to take notes or not. We'll send you a copy of the recording afterwards. I think that's it on my end. I'm going to hand it over to Kevin right now. Kev, you ready?
I am ready. Thank you for that. Spotlight myself. All right, hello everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. And thank you, Greg, for that delightful introduction. We do have a lot of information, and this seminar, as educators, we do try to make things interactive when we can, but this will be a lot of information. So we will talk at you for much of this, but we'll try to make it interesting, the best that we can. And to that end, I'll see here. Let me just want to first start off getting an understanding of the room today. So bear with me. I'm going to kind of present. So we're going to do just a quick little poll. All right, so just a quick introduction about Greg and myself, and we promise not to make this story time, but we'll just in case, to those of you that we've already met, already talked to, welcome, and to those who aren't Princeton tutoring customers, thank you for joining us. But a little bit of background about Greg and myself. After we graduated from Princeton, we went on to work in kind of more traditional Princeton graduate type of fields. And I'll just a little bit of backstory. Before even college, we both loved not only class, but we did a lot of tutoring and teaching, whether we were working with middle schoolers when we were high schoolers, or when we were in college, we worked with high school students, and we really loved working with other students. And after graduating, largely due to the fact that I think the technical term for our situation was broke, we went on to get traditional jobs in the finance and consulting field. But as passion work, we continue to tutor and work with students outside of our kind of the day jobs at the time. And we built a company called Princeton Tutoring. As time went on, we were fortunate to have some success in our traditional careers, but we had an opportunity to convert and work full-time with education. And just a little bit of personal background, we found that the education that we had, we owed so much to it, the modest success that we had coming from an immigrant background and also a low income background, that we thought it'd be just wonderful to be able to serve other people in the world of education. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to chat with you today and to work with you. And a little bit of context for the company that we run, Princeton Tutoring, and a sister company, Prep Maven. Our primary service is in individual subject tutoring and test prep. But if you really think about the big picture of what we're trying to do, it's the reason why we want to help students with math or reading more effectively or researching more effectively is ultimately to help prepare for college and ultimately for longer term success. So incidental to all of our tutoring, and not even incidental, like central to it, is helping families prepare properly for their college and post-college journey. So let's see here. All right, so to that end, we're going to really talk about how things are being affected and to an extent upended by COVID. So step one, as Greg mentioned, is we want to make sure that everybody understands the core facts, the real way that college admission actually works. And it's been, done in a comparable way for the last, for several decades now, but we want to make sure everybody knows how that works. And then when we understand that, we'll be able to more clearly see how COVID is affecting this process. And we're going to view this from the student perspective of somebody preparing for college, but also how universities and admissions officers are thinking about this and actually explicitly communicating about how we are thinking about COVID. And then ultimately, the big, most important question is like, well, what should you be doing depending on your place in the process? How do you take this information and create a plan that works for you? And as we've done college preparation or tutoring along the way, this kind of perhaps goes without saying, but we've seen a lot of instances where people make decisions or try to make a plan based on a rumor that they heard or some commentary from an auntie or an uncle or a friend, or you see that your neighbor is doing something, and that's understandable. But first things first, we want to really have the core facts about, based on research and direct communication with admissions officers about how the process actually works. And some of you may know this, but we're just going to dive right into it. So if you look at the right side of this screen, we're going to share a little bit of information about the admissions reading process. And from a very practical level, this sounds very kind of almost silly to say, but in order to get into a college, whether it's selective or not quite so selective, you have to succeed within the admissions reading process. You want to get admissions officers to say yes to your application. So from a mechanical standpoint, we want to understand how that operation actually works. So one, the way that many admissions offices works is they take the country. If you look at the top, the USA country logo here, different admissions officers will essentially be tasked towards different regions of the country. So for example, the Northeast admissions officer team will be a regional group, and they'll be in charge of not only recruiting high school students from that area, but also leading the assessment process for those students. So throughout the year prior to application season, they're trying to engage with high schools in their region, understand what those high schools are all about, the type of coursework, the type of students at those specific high schools, whether it's private or public, it's big or small, what options are available at that school. And they're trying to get students to apply to their college. And when the application comes through, you typically have a first and oftentimes a second, maybe even a third reader. And they don't take a ton of time to read your application. Oftentimes we're dealing with numbers like 10 minutes or so, but they're taking your high school file that is presented, your application file, and processing it, typically with a quantitative framework and also a qualitative framework, and also assessing academic information and non-academic information. And the way that many admissions offices will work is they'll actually give you numbers for academic score and non-academic score. So it may be like from 1 to 5 or 1 to 9, but upon reading your information, they'll give you, oftentimes 2 scores, or at least take notes and have a general assessment of how they feel about your application. Obviously, you want a little bit of checks. You want some checks in this process. So you may have a second reader who does the same thing. And if the application makes sense to pass on to a committee after they view this, after they execute this process, the application will go to a committee. And the committee is essentially just a group of people. It'd be smaller, but if you imagine taking the participants in this Zoom webinar right now, and we take say 9 or so, and have a conversation about the particular applicant and reviewing the notes about the academics and the kind of character and extracurricular information, they'll make an ultimate decision based on a conversation, sometimes I'll even use the word argument based on maybe the advocacy of one reader or another, and they'll talk about it and ultimately judge yes, admit, no, deny, or maybe defer, which suggests that they'll consider you if there are spots open later. There's some notes on the left side about just core mission statement themes, right? So it's important to really first and foremost understand what students are looking for in colleges to kind of support their own development and growth. But these are the values that colleges have in terms of teaching students, serving the public, producing leaders. They care about diversity, not just ethnicity or religious diversity, but diversity of thought and background. They care about community, they care about critical thinking and intellectual and personal growth. And the way that they achieve these goals or achieve their mission is through admission. So we want you to understand not only the process that admission readers have, but also their thought process as well as they're judging. And in terms of the three big bubbles or the three big areas or what we call pillars of what admissions officers care about, it's these three. Number one, first and foremost, is academic achievement. I think that there's a lot of things that go into college preparation, but let's not forget that college, first and foremost, is a academic institution. So your information about your academics is by far the most important information that colleges use to judge your readiness or your preparedness for that specific college. But 2 and 3 are quite important as well. We use the term extracurricular distinction as an important judgment factor. It's not just the extracurriculars that you're doing, but if any way you've made yourself distinct through the extracurriculars that you're engaged in. And then 3 is super important, but also of all of them a bit fuzzy. It's character. And we'll go into a little bit more about how colleges are judging character and how they make inferences about your character or your student's character from the application itself. So again, this is very conceptual, but now we actually have data based on NACAC survey, which is a group of admissions officers, a strong community of admissions officers, actually, college counselors actually have survey data about what admissions officers care about. So if you look here at the end, sorry, there's get a little stat nerdy. We have around 200, a little over 200 admissions officers have responded to this survey, indicating the factors that they find important in their reading process. So this is quite important, obviously, and you'll see that it's broken out between considerable importance, moderate importance, limited importance, and no importance. So this is very specific quantitative data about what actually matters to admissions officers when they're reviewing your application. And you see the red line, we have essentially 45.7% or half and above are really finding these 4 rows super important. And as you might guess, it's the grades in your courses, the grades in your college prep courses, which we're looking at the advanced courses that you have. The strength of your curriculum is super important, and then your admission scores to 45.7% of these officers is super important. You have all these other factors as well towards the bottom half or the bottom 2/3 of these rows, and we want to most certainly consider them. The essay, 23% say it's quite important. We have this factor called students' demonstrated interest, which is a gauge of how much it feels like the students really care about going to this college through their behavior. And this is an interesting row as well, because some colleges, 16% find it really important, 24% find it not important, but a growing number of colleges say it's not important at all. So depending on the college that you're interested in, they may or may not be interested in whether you've visited or even have demonstrated such interest. So just keep that in mind. And we have all these other factors: recommendations from your counselor and teacher, class rank, extracurriculars, AP scores, work, and so on and so forth. So when you think about what your student is sending forth to colleges, it's this stuff, right? It's all this information. And this gives you a composite sense of how admissions officers are actually judging, based on their own survey responses, this information. And as we mentioned earlier, this is composite information. So this is 220 different colleges, or more than 200, responding to how they're thinking about college admissions and how they're judging. But every college just has their own right to judge how they'd like to. So there's comparable principles and a model of application, but what the college has its own kind of power to say, oh, here's what we care about a little more than the other college. And just patterns that we see based on the data and also based on common sense is that the larger and typically public colleges typically care more about quantitative information. So you see a college that may have, say, 100,000 applications coming in through the door. It's a large public college. Well, they're going to lean historically on GPA or weight adjusted GPA according to the difficulty of your course load and test scores, more so than the qualitative information that you're going to get through extracurriculars, essays, recommendations, and that information. And on the other hand, understandably, the smaller or the private colleges are going to place relatively more consideration to those qualitative factors. So you have a small, beautiful liberal arts school in the Northeast. They may have a little bit more time or a little bit more care placed towards really kind of gathering or inferring character and qualitative information from the application data that they receive. So just know that we're presenting a big picture understanding of how applications and admissions works, but obviously each school has their own individual priorities and they see things that their own specific way. Some comments about selectivity as well, and just to give you a landscape understanding of colleges. Again, this is from the Department of Education. There are, in the universe of four-year colleges, over 4,000, but when you look at private or public degree granting four-year colleges, there's on the order of 2,400 or so. But this data shows you just the average acceptance rate or it shows information about the average acceptance rates. So if you look at the red block on the first one on the left, 19.2% of colleges accept fewer than 50%, which means that 80% of colleges are accepting more than half of their applicants. If you look at the average, which is shown at the top, in 2017, the average acceptance rates across all colleges was 67%. So the general message that is clear is that there's your average college or a typical college is really not super selective. However, the very selective colleges are get a disproportionate amount of applications. You see like 36.5% applications to 19.2% of the schools, and also just from the work that we do and the families that we talk to, we believe that those several hundred schools that accept fewer than 50% of applications get a disproportionate amount of kind of attention and to an extent stress of like, we have to get into these schools. So just want to kind of lay that information out for you so you understand just the landscape of different colleges and their selectivity. And then just some trends over time. So you'll see that this chart shows data about how many applications students have been sending in over time on average. So starting in 1995, for example, 60% of students submitted at least 3 applications. But if you look more recently to 2017 and beyond, that number has exceeded 80%. So more and more students are sending in more and more applications. And then you look at data for submitting more than 7 applications. So you see that, back in 95, we had 10% of students doing that, and now it's 36%. And the number, you can see the trends, they continue to rise. So what does this all mean? You may kind of be horrified by the selectivity data, or the fact that those numbers of acceptance rates, especially at selective schools, seem to be just astonishingly low and continue to get lower. You may feel that it's just seemingly impossible to get in these schools, but part of that is just simply the fact that students are applying to more and more colleges now. So therefore, that's just going to naturally reduce the acceptance rates. And obviously the rate at which those available spots is increasing is far less than the rate that applications are increasing. So again, just context for understanding why acceptance rates seem to be declining across many schools. There's a variety of factors, but most important is the number of applications that are coming through. All right, so this is a little lecture-y, but hopefully you understand just the big picture of how college admissions works, the specific pieces within your application that get judged, how colleges typically are judging those factors, and some general trends or kind of observations about different schools and how they assess the information. And knowing this, we can then say, okay, we have a basic understanding of how applications work and how admissions works. And now we say, okay, well, what is happening as a result of COVID? So we'll just go piece by piece. First and foremost, as we mentioned, grades and test scores is the #1 most important thing for most colleges. And these are obviously being compromised right now, just from a very mechanical level. In the spring, when the world was completely uncertain about just about everything, and people are rushing to, stock up on toilet paper, and schools are shifting to a full online model without fully understanding how to deliver online education to millions of students. Public and private schools across the board went PAPS fail for their transcripts. So now instead of A, B, C, D, unfortunately F sometimes, you're going to get just a pass fail. Well, that's not very granular information. In terms of advanced classes, a lot of students taking APs just had trouble accessing the AP test itself, or they changed the model such that it's a 45-minute test instead of a several-hour test, and there's technical issues with reporting your score. And across the board, as well as till today, students face challenges with online learning, either the fact that they can access it, but it's just really hard to learn online for some students, or because of just the sad number of students just don't have proper access to online education, so through network challenges or technological or financial challenges. So this is a big deal, and it's the most important thing for most colleges, and it's being dramatically compromised. Standardized tests. So more than 2/3 of colleges are now test optional. So if you look at that link below, if you go to fairtest.org, you can see the list of test optional schools. And historically, we see that colleges, as we saw from the data, 45.7% think that test scores are extremely important. But there's just been a trend where families feel that it may be uncertain the true value of taking tests. But now, just because of access issues, the fact that it's really difficult to even get a testing date, or a couple of days ago there was supposed to be an SAT in the local area, and many of these were canceled. Students who want to take the test cannot even take the test, or there's just a variety of challenges here. So just out of complete fairness, while colleges may like seeing scores to help with their judgment process, it would only be fair for many of them just to go test optional, because it's just simply not an option for many students. So this is a big thing that's happening. The second pillar, extracurricular distinction. Well, how can you show extracurricular distinction if you can't engage in any group extracurriculars? So we think of things like volunteer work, or sports, or music, or artistic expression. And while you can do some things independently, fortunately now with online access or private study, you can do some things, but for the most part, meaningful extracurricular activities are severely compromised. So all these really challenging situations. Demonstrated interest. What if you can't visit a school? So for a good portion of schools appreciate or even care about the fact that you come visit them, and they take note of that for demonstrated interest. But that's simply not an option for many people now. And many colleges are understandably not kind of taking visitors or doing tours. So how do you demonstrate interest? And on top of that, even more, just as important is, well, if I'm a junior or I'm a sophomore considering colleges and I want to get a feel for the college, how can I even understand what's a good fit if I can't go visit the college? This is a challenging problem to face as well. So, this seems like very kind of sad information, and this is just the reality. But these are some of the major effects of what COVID is doing to students right now. And just want to ask you, all right, I'm going to launch polling. Okay, so with respect to college prep, which COVID impacts are worrying you the most. So you see at the top, this is multiple choice. So you can answer many, but we'll give you some time. And let's say you've been meditating a lot and doing yoga, and at the bottom, you're not worried about it. That's fine too, but you just want to get a sense of what people are worried about. So we'll give you a minute or so to respond to this. All right, we'll give you let's just, all right, so here's what we see. By far and away, 83% concerned about extracurriculars, school visits, for two reasons, right? It's like, one, demonstrated interest, and two, just proper research and understanding what's a good fit school for my son or daughter. Access to educational program grades, that's a big one. It's 40%. Sports. Okay, so this is super helpful information, and I'll compare it. So we do actually have some data. Let me see. Sorry. Okay, so just as a comparison, and this is just some research that a group called Aren't Science Group, in partnership with the College Board, just surveyed students about what they're worried about right now. So this is 2,000 students, and again, everybody's different, has different types of worries, but they're concerned about extracurricular activities, visits of campus at a lower rate than our community, and this is just interesting to see. And I just also want to stage this as like there's a difference in what other students are worried about or what you're worried about, and what we're gonna kind of suggest is like what's actually really important to worry about and what maybe you shouldn't have to worry about so much. So we'll get into that. And I do recognize that we're talking about all the problems that COVID has presented so far and what we should be worried about, but trust me, we'll get into some ideas about, well, what to do about this and how to address these problems. And then more rough news, right? So you look at this chart we mentioned earlier, and the red stuff is what's being compromised by COVID. Grades, transcript is compromised. Students are having trouble with the online learning. Admission test scores, demonstrated interest. The orange ones, recommendations, are not directly affected, but the fact is that if you're online or you're forced to be socially distanced, maybe you can't get to know your counselor or teacher as well as you would otherwise be able to, and that's compromised as well. Extracurricular activities, test scores, work, everything is being compromised. So the only reasonable solution for admissions officers is to change the way that they're doing things. So at least for now. So we know the basics of how admissions works, but now we have to understand, well, colleges must adapt to the new circumstances. And the question is, how are they reacting to this? And again, we can use our intuition or we can listen to rumors, but what we really want to do is hear or read or talk about what they're actually saying, real admissions officers. And the top left one is a director at Tulane, and I don't know if this makes you feel better or worse, but we're going to take some time to work through these. So Mr. Schiffman here says, I don't even know where to begin. We're going to hit the reset button hard on this one. We're going to have to retrain how we review applications, and we're kind of figuring it out as we go. So I don't know if this makes you feel horrible or feel better, but the key point is that admissions officers and admissions teams, these are real humans, and they're trying to figure this out, and they're changing a lot, and it's not some black box computer system that you're applying to, right? Or that's judging your application. It's humans with feelings and compassion that are trying to do what's best for students. Now this quote was done a little bit earlier in the process. So That quote is maybe it's amusing that he mentioned that, but later on the Tulane Dean of Admissions got a little bit more specific. So now here's what they're going to do. We're going to put more weight on the student's whole high school experience. So while we might have some compromises in the short term with grades and extracurriculars, well, we're obviously just naturally going to have to pay attention to other information earlier on and hopefully after the effects of COVID's lessen with respect to what's going on in school. I feel confident in our ability to gauge the students' ability to succeed at Tulane with their transcript and the courses they take. So obviously academics, they're going to look at the non-affected information and getting to know the student. Well, getting to know the student is really important, very qualitative though. So it's like, well, let's make sure that we figure out ways to kind of express ourselves or make sure students express themselves in a way that admissions can just get to know you in an easier fashion. Yale, what are they saying? We will take a closer look at elements like the teacher recommendations, high school transcripts, and student writing, including the personal essay. So again, these factors that we mentioned earlier that were more qualitative or historically, according to the survey, less kind of measured as extremely important, are going to get a much heavier look and be used just because that's the only thing that's available to judge. And it's obviously important, but it's going to take an even closer look right now. We look at MIT with a very interesting font up here. And again, the note is that admissions officers are not naturally mean people. They want to advocate and support students, and they don't want to penalize students for factors outside their control. And here are some specifics: changes to grading policies and procedures, cancellations of activities and other exams, and more because of COVID, right? So it's like, it would just be ridiculous to punish students for factors outside of control. And the big word that we want to focus on is context. Colleges are always, whether they're trying to evaluate how you performed with respect to whatever geographic location, whatever school you're at, context is really important. Colleges are evaluating your application with respect to the story it presents about who you are and where you come from and how you've applied yourself in your environment, as opposed to just looking in a vacuum, this information. So they just have a more challenging job now because there's even fewer pieces of data that they can use to kind of infer these stories, but they're gonna have to just focus on that. And here's a note from Boston College, just specifically about disruption, stress, and grades. Right, so they're explicitly stating that impacts might have a negative impact on students' performance. It's kind of tragic what's happening with kind of personal situations, health challenges, financial challenges, that some families are losing work and students are understandably stressed out, and it's going to naturally affect many students. So they're saying we're going to remain flexible with students whose grades are showing some decline, and this was a previous semester. And then we look at the quote below: students who experience a significant decline should feel welcome to explain their unique circumstances as an addendum to their application to provide us with this additional context. So we see that colleges are going to have to infer more things, but they're giving opportunities explicitly on their application supplements and what we'll see next is the Common App itself is giving you an opportunity to tell more, to help admissions officers understand your story in light of what's going on. Let's see here. Okay, so, and here's a new addition to the Common App, which is 12th graders are addressing this right now. You actually have a new Common App, a COVID essay that you can write. You have 250 words that you can say just how COVID has specifically affected you. So we look at the essay. Community disruptions such as COVID and natural disasters have deep and long-lasting impacts. If you need it, this space is yours to describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans, and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study spaces. So we see this as a great opportunity to specifically offer deep reflection. Again, we'll say deep reflection on something insightful or some values, insight, and growth, and something distinct about you that you can reveal through this essay. It's not a time to say that something that everybody else is saying, but if COVID has affected you in a very meaningful way, you have an opportunity to express that, and colleges want to hear it. So this is just really important for us to understand. All right, so now there's another piece that's important to refer to. And we look at this, it's called the 300 admissions officers actually got together and signed a statement called Care Counts in Crisis. And I urge you to maybe write this down and look up what they actually said. But again, these admissions officers and the deans of admissions have all signed this. And we look at the quote, underscoring their commitment to self-care, care for others, equity, and meaningful learning. So expressing commitment when reviewing applications to take into account the challenges and obstacles students are facing, encouraging students to share information about these challenges in their applications. And then they explicitly kind of list what they do care about, right? So yes, everything is compromised, but in light of that, what do we care about and how do we kind of judge? So number one, self-care. This is, hopefully goes without saying, but it's a challenging time for a lot of students and families. And first and foremost, it's take care of yourself, address wellness. Two, and this is a big theme of what we want to talk about today, it's like, in spite of it, if there's only one takeaway about what to focus on, it's going to be your academic work. That's by far the most important thing. It's being compromised to an extent by COVID, but it's still an important, meaningful area. So above all, if you're concerned about extracurriculars, that's understandable. And we've addressed that, or college admissions officers and deans have addressed the fact that we are completely understanding that extracurriculars are compromised. So focus on your academics. Three, if you can, to the socially distanced extent that it's possible, or even within your family, for number four, serve and contribute to others. This is what they care about. And they specifically caution against creating some sort of service Olympics to be more competitive or make yourself more competitive. But these are just genuine things that admissions officers care about. And then five, explicitly saying if extracurriculars and summer activities are compromised, you will not be disadvantaged. So try your best, do what you can. But if you just don't have any access to extracurriculars, or you want to be safe and you see some people playing sports but you're not doing it, that's not going to be a punishable kind of decision for you. So I just want to make that clear. And then we have some commentary about what we'll call the character movement. So as the general information that we've been talking about is like most of the quantitative factors are being severely compromised, and then admissions officers and just the community is saying, okay, we have to shift more to these qualitative factors. And then we talked about extracurriculars and academics, but what we're really talking about in many ways is character, that ambiguous or nebulous third pillar of college admissions. But we see, especially for selective schools, and this is survey information, that you look at the red blocks of considerable importance or moderate importance for selective schools, 42.3 plus 57.7 is 100%. 100% of admissions officers at selective schools care about positive character attributes as important factors to address in your college application. So just know that this survey was done prior to COVID. So now this information is even more important, just because there's compromises to the non-character attributes on the application. And you may ask yourself, well, how do admissions officers even judge characters? There, hopefully there will not ever be a character SAT or some sort of direct test, but they're using inference. They're using inference. So if we look, how do you judge character? Again, this is from a poll of 447 admissions officers. They're looking at your essay to see how you think, how you feel, how you act throughout, throughout your life. They're looking at teacher and counselor recommendations. They're looking at the nature of your work. So what have you done and what does that reveal about your character? So for example, if you say that you're intellectually curious and you're into service or you're into healthcare, well, what have you done to exhibit that? Obviously outside, prior to COVID, and what do you intend to do post-COVID? And maybe you can tell stories about that in your personal statement, and the way in which you reflect, or the insights that you have, or the stories that you tell, will reveal what type of person you are, what type of values that you have. To some extent, we have the interview, and there may be other ways they can do it as well. A note about the interview is that in general, it's not like a super important part of many schools' applications, but yeah, we do have a note of that here. All right. Some big picture data about other ways that COVID is affecting just applications. And we see some initial data results from the Common App and FAFSA. So it's kind of unfortunate to see that applications are down. So for early action, early decision, there are 8% fewer applications through November 2nd compared to last year, with 60% reporting declines. And there was a disproportionate amount of fewer applications coming from first generation and low income students. So this is just sad to see that inequality will widen as a result of COVID, or more first generation or low income students may not feel that college is an appropriate fit for them because of maybe application fees or access, or maybe just financial issues they have to work. So this is what we're seeing. And again, the FAFSA completion rates almost in line with the first generation applications for applications for financial aid are down as well. So this is what we're seeing now. We don't know if these numbers are going to be aligned with what we'll see for regular decisions. So for example, well, are people applying, not applying early, and more will apply in January? We're not sure, but we'll see when the data comes out. Now, we also want to get a sense of what college presidents or college leaders are saying, or what they're worried about. And first and foremost, I know the font may be a little bit tiny, but 86% are concerned about enrollment, 64% concerned about financial viability, 45% worried about the online learning environment. So this may not have direct relevance to you as parents and to your students, but just know that if you're thinking about specific colleges, even especially smaller private colleges that might be a good fit, you obviously want to make sure that they're going to be financially viable. And we'll pray and we'll hope that the pandemic kind of will kind of subside meaningfully in the short term, so that there won't be dramatic financial challenges for colleges. But just be aware of what colleges are worried about. And we'll then switch to, so okay, just to recap, reviewed what is important from an admission standpoint, just generally. We talked about the specifics of what colleges are, how they're responding to this crisis, and what students are worried about. And the question is like, well, what do we do, right? This is the most important for me. Well, what do we do about this if I have an 11th grader, a 10th or 9th grader? How do we think about this? And a lot of this may seem like common sense advice, but it's knowing your priorities and focusing on what's truly important, what you can control is the name of the game. So number one, understand that colleges are aware of context, and admissions officers are adjusting their review process accordingly. Very specifically, tactically, and I know this is challenging with the hybrid learning, remote learning, the number one area for everyone to make sure that they're just focused on is the academics, right? It may be hard for you to adjust to this, but, and you may be concerned about extracurriculars, and that's understandable, but kind of shifting all your focus to make sure that your academics are not compromised is going to be a really important priority. Two, these are 300 deans of admissions are actually telling us what they care about. Well, we should kind of take that to heart. So number one, self-care. This goes without showing. Make sure. I personally work with a lot of students, and I know it's a tough time for everybody right now, parents and students alike. So make sure that you're taking care of yourself. But then again, number two on that list, academic work, service and contribution to others, and family contributions to the best that you can in your home, or to do these things. And then the last block says extracurricular and summer activities, but that's, again, as we saw, the fact that they're not going to be kind of negatively judging you if you have compromised access to these things. Another just really important thing, and this is just from my experience and our company's experience working with really smart students and students trying to access really selective colleges, or just trying to develop themselves for the future, is this kind of really baseline, obvious understanding of the importance of proper reading, writing, and thinking. And this is something that all of us can do pandemic or no pandemic, and perhaps there's even more time to do this. And there's the other obvious irony that sometimes school gives so much reading or so much homework that you can't even read or write or think about the things that are truly interesting to you. But there's obvious understanding these are important areas, but it's kind of strategically and practically important too. So for example, former dean of admissions at Princeton says that your ability to write well is critical to our decision because your writing reflects your thinking. So no matter what question is asked on a college application, admissions officers are looking to see how well you convey your ideas and express yourself in writing. It is our window to your world. So we look at that line, how well you convey your ideas and express yourself in writing. Just our general observation of the students that really have exceptional ideas and can express themselves well are those that read broadly and intently and actually kind of enjoy reading. And I know that the sad thing is that school kind of can be so busy that there's no time for those who really like reading, or maybe it can actually take the joy of reading away from some students. But we really encourage students just to try their best to kind of enhance those skills. And again, it doesn't, for us, it doesn't need to mean you're reading really long, really challenging kind of esoteric novels or pieces of philosophy, but just forming that habit is just a really good thing. And I know that it's challenging to form that for some students, but we really just want to encourage that. And then just another point based on some really important research about just how college really affects life, the kind of big picture observation. But if we look at this piece on the left is a pretty meaningful research paper from a while ago. It's from 1999. But what they did, what Dale and Kruger did, was they took a look over the course of 30 years, a population of students who got into really selective schools and went to those selective schools. And then they took another population of students that got into selective schools and decided not to go to that very selective school and went to a less selective school. And then they watched them or measured their success measured through, and I know this is not the end all be all success measure, but they measured their earnings over time and said, okay, well, if you got into a really selective school, say like Princeton, and you went to Princeton versus your twin brother got into Princeton and went to Rutgers, which is a great school, but not as selective. Well, how would your income be affected over time? And here's what they found, that students who attended the more selective schools did not earn more than those other students. So that's a really important factor, right? Research. And then on the second side, on the right side, a survey of 30,000 graduates, the Gallup, which is a really, a reputable research organization, studied 30,000 college graduates for kind of wellness or well-being, and kind of tried to find relationships between where you went to college, public, private, small, large, selective or not, in terms of your well-being in your personal life and your work life. And they found no kind of meaningful correlation between that. However, what they did find was the most important factors to your well-being were actually your experiences in college, not where you went, but to the extent that you kind of made the most of your experience there. And factors like engaging professors or mentorship or kind of community organizations that within the college that you access were the most important factors. So this is 30,000 data points. This is 30 years of data. And these are just really important lessons that just to step back a little bit and understand, yes, we want to kind of be as practical and strategic as possible in terms of like setting ourselves up for success and for college and beyond. But, if you look at both of these pieces of information or these research, the key factor is that it's the students that's driving the success. And the most important factor is the way that they're kind of engaging with their environment. So this is like a really important takeaway. So we had a list. We don't have a ton of time, but I'll try to address some of these. And I saw a couple notes chatted about kind of questions. So testing. So these were emailed prior. So list of colleges that waive SAT and ACT due to the pandemic. You want to go to fairtest.org. Fairtest.org has this list, and that'll help you out there. In terms of the second, third, and fourth bullets, SAT testing advice, how significant will scores be in admission, submitting standardized testing during COVID, and so here's what we're saying. So our general recommendation is that if you cannot take the SAT, or it's going to kind of disadvantage you in a way, then you can actually take advantage of the fact that, you know, it's not take advantage of it. You're going to accept that it's test optional and you don't need to do that. However, we do see that for students that can apply themselves, and if you're a junior right now, or there may be a chance to take the SAT, you can prepare for it properly. When the world opens up or the testing centers become more accessible, you won't be punished for not being able to take the SAT if these schools remain test optional, but it can be used to your advantage. So if to the extent that you can use testing to your advantage, if you can prepare properly and demonstrate a strong score, that's a great way to do it. If you can kind of manage your academics and prepare properly for these, the major SAT or ACT or the SAT subject test. So to the extent that you can use it to your advantage, we highly encourage you to consider that. School visits and selection. Virtual campus tours, pros and cons of virtual tours. Should students sign up for virtual open houses? You want to think about school visits from two different lenses. Is demonstrated interest and actually what's meaningfully appropriate for you to understand the nature of the school. So I would say, especially for those colleges where demonstrated interest is important, yes, take advantage of the virtual tours. If they have seminars or they have Q&A sessions or webinars, you should do that just to learn about that school. But yeah, many of them will actually be paying attention to your engagement. For many of the schools that don't care about demonstrated interest, that's okay. But just for your own use, since everything's so limited now, you should, just in your college research process, check out the numbers. But, the virtual tour may not be as good as kind of visiting the campus and seeing the kids, but it's your next best thing. Extracurriculars, we talked about a lot. Academics, really important. Courses that are prerequisite for college admission for science, engineering, computer science. So this one's really important. You do not have to feel like there's like some specific list for some specific college. That's not really the way it works. So the key is just like to pick appropriate courses that are interesting to you and just doing well in advanced courses. So of course, if you want to apply to like say an MIT or another technical school, it would be sensible that you take appropriate challenging courses aligned with your interest, but it's not like there's like some master list out there. It's as we mentioned, a little bit fuzzier than like a complete recipe. Average AP courses that IVs expect and why. Again, there's no specific list. Statistically, we've done some study about kids that get into Ivy schools are typically taking, and again, I don't want to add anxiety, is 7 or more AP courses for really selective colleges. But then again, just take that all into context, and things are different now. And in terms of the strategy, we don't have a ton of time to get into that, but we did our best to respond to I think hopefully you can infer how best to use this information to craft a strategy that works for you. And it's kind of a monumental task to just in roughly 50 minutes cover everything you need to know about college applications and how COVID's affecting it. But our hope is that we provide the most important information for you, and that you can use this to make decisions and understand what's really important to focus on, what not to focus on, how to make a plan for the future, and how to maybe reflect upon the past. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. If you have questions, we want to hear from you. Again, this is limited time, and we haven't done too many of these broad audience seminars, so we're looking forward to staying more engaged. But please reach out to us if you have any comments, feedback, or anything appropriate, or there's any specific information that would be particularly interesting or helpful for you. Just please send us an email. You have our email. We've been bugging you with all these reminders about the seminar, but we do want to hear from you, and we just want to better serve you. This is, again, just one thing that we can try to do as people that care about education and supporting families to make things a little bit easier for you, to guide you in a good direction. So that's all I have, and I hope to hear from you again soon. Thanks for sticking with me. It's you kind of heard me blab for a while, but thank you to everybody.